When the papers were signed, I felt strangely calm. Not broken. Not angry. Just quiet. Aloan walked past me like I was already a stranger. Her heels clicked against the courthouse floor, steady and confident. Mine felt heavy, like every step carried 10 years of memories. Outside, her brother, Tyrion, was waiting beside the SUV. He gave me a look that said I deserved this. Maybe everyone thought I did. Aloan had been telling her version of our story for months. By the time we stood before the judge, most people had already chosen her side. I stood there alone after they drove off. The parking lot was almost empty. I didn't rush to call anyone. I didn't try to defend myself anymore. I had done enough of that. Instead, I drove to the small apartment I had rented quietly weeks before. No one knew about it except my attorney, Mireille Vance. Inside, the place was plain. One couch. One table. A desk near the window. On that desk sat a locked file box and my laptop. That was my real focus. While Aloan had been fighting for what everyone could see, I had been organizing documents, contracts, and plans that no one asked about. I opened the laptop and checked my email. 3 new messages from clients confirmed what I had hoped for. Things were moving exactly as planned. Slowly. Carefully. I didn't celebrate. I didn't smile. I just closed the screen and looked around the quiet room. For the first time in months, there was no shouting, no tension, no accusations. They thought I had nothing left. They were wrong. Looking back, I can see the shift clearly. It started the month Aloan began working with Corrigan Hale. At first, she talked about him like he was a lucky break. She said he understood the market, that he had vision. I supported her. I even helped her review her first proposal with him. Then the late nights began. She said they were meeting investors. Sometimes she wouldn't come home until after midnight. When I asked simple questions, she acted like I was attacking her. If I wondered why she couldn't answer a call, she said I didn't trust her. If I mentioned the kids missed her, she said I was trying to make her feel guilty. Her phone was always face down. She stepped outside to take calls. Once, I walked into the kitchen and she quickly ended a conversation. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. At gatherings, she started telling a different story about our marriage. She would laugh and say I was too cautious, that I never took risks, that I didn't understand ambition. People nodded like they were hearing facts. I sat there, feeling like a guest in my own life. Corrigan's name came up more and more. She quoted him, compared me to him. He believes in expansion, she would say. He thinks bigger. Somewhere in those months, I stopped arguing. I stopped trying to prove I wasn't the problem. I watched carefully instead. I listened. I paid attention to what was changing around me. The distance between us wasn't loud. It was quiet, cold, and steady. By the time she called me an obstacle, I already knew she had chosen a different path. When the divorce process began, everything turned formal and cold. What used to be private arguments inside our home became public statements in a courtroom. Aloan didn't just want to separate. She wanted to win. Her lawyer, Dashiell Kincaid, was calm and sharp. He spoke slowly, like every word was planned days before. He presented charts, bank records, and old emails. He said I made poor financial decisions. He said I avoided stable opportunities. He called me inconsistent. Aloan sat beside him, quiet but firm. When she spoke, her voice was steady. She said she carried the family, that I resisted growth, that my choices created stress in the home. Listening to her felt unreal. It was like she was describing someone else. I tried to explain that I had been careful on purpose, that not every risk was wise. But my words sounded small compared to the way her lawyer framed everything. He turned caution into weakness. He turned privacy into secrecy. He turned patience into lack of ambition. Friends who once visited our home now sent short messages saying they hoped things would be resolved peacefully. No one asked for my side anymore. During the custody discussion, she said the children needed stability. She said her income path was clear while mine was uncertain. The word uncertain echoed in the room. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't interrupt. I answered what I was asked and nothing more. My silence was seen as guilt. Piece by piece, the image of me changed in that courtroom. Not because I fought and lost, but because I chose not to fight the way they expected. And they mistook that choice for weakness. By the time we reached the final negotiation meeting, Aloan came prepared with a clear list. She wanted the house, both cars, primary custody, full control over the joint investment accounts. There was no hesitation in her voice when she said it. Dashiell placed the documents in front of me like it was a simple business exchange. He explained that signing would avoid a longer court fight. He made it sound like the reasonable choice. Everyone in the room expected me to resist. The house carried memories. The cars were fully paid off. The investments had taken years to build. On paper, it looked like she was asking for almost everything. I looked at the numbers carefully. I asked a few short questions about timelines and transfer procedures. Then I said, "That's fine." For a second, the room went quiet. Aloan studied my face, maybe waiting for anger or sarcasm. There was none. I signed each page without rushing and without complaint. Her shoulders relaxed after the last signature. It was the first time in months I saw relief on her face. She believed she had secured control. She believed I finally understood I had lost. But I wasn't thinking about what was leaving my name. I was thinking about what was staying under it. I walked out of that office lighter, not heavier. Not because I felt free yet, but because I knew the real weight had never been in the house, the cars, or those accounts. And sometimes, agreeing quickly is not surrender. Sometimes, it is strategy. During the negotiations, most of the attention stayed on visible things. Property value, bank balances, baiklas, school schedules. Every conversation circled around what could be measured and divided. There was one item listed among the paperwork that barely received a glance. My small consulting company, Northvale Strategies. It was registered years ago when I started taking independent contracts on the side. At the time, Aloan had called it a hobby. She said it was too small to matter. Over time, she stopped mentioning it completely. When Dashiell reviewed the asset list, he paused for only a moment on the company name. He asked if it generated consistent income. I answered honestly, "It varies." He nodded and moved on. There was no push to evaluate its potential. No request for deeper review. Aloan didn't ask a single question about it. Her focus stayed on the house appraisal numbers and transferring the investment accounts. She wanted clean control over what she believed had the highest value. I didn't argue for more. I didn't try to raise the company's importance. I simply stated that I would retain full ownership and responsibility for it. The clause was added without debate. Northvale Strategies remained under my name alone. After everything was signed, I went back to my apartment and reviewed pending contracts. There were agreements in progress. Quiet partnerships forming. Work that didn't require public attention. The company didn't look impressive on paper. It didn't have a flashy office or large staff. But it was structured carefully. It carried intellectual property tied only to me. She measured wealth by what could be taken quickly. She never considered what grows quietly over time. For 3 years, while Aloan talked about expansion and big opportunities, I focused on structure. I didn't chase attention. I built systems. Most of my work was done from a small desk, late at night or early in the morning. I reviewed logistics models, drafted operational plans, and negotiated service agreements. The clients I worked with preferred privacy. They didn't care about appearances. They cared about results. Aloan rarely asked what I was doing. If she saw me working, she assumed it was minor consulting. Something temporary. Something small. I never corrected her. I registered process frameworks and technical models under my name. Every document was filed carefully. Every agreement was reviewed twice. I avoided partnerships that required shared ownership. If a contract required joint liability, I declined. The growth wasn't loud. There were no launch parties or public announcements. Just steady progress. Small contracts led to larger ones. Referrals came from performance, not marketing. While she focused on scaling quickly, I focused on sustainability. I studied risk exposure, tax structure, and compliance details. I made sure everything connected directly back to me, not to any shared marital asset. By the time the divorce began, the foundation was already strong. The revenue was reinvested back into the company, strengthening it further. On paper, it still looked modest. But internally, it was stable. I wasn't competing with her. I wasn't trying to outshine her. I was building something that could survive pressure. And pressure was coming. Corrigan Hale had a way of making everything seem urgent and exciting. Every plan he suggested to Aloan sounded like a guaranteed win. He pushed her to take our joint savings and pour it into a new venture. One that promised fast growth but carried heavy risk. Aloan believed him completely. She told me it was an opportunity we couldn't miss. She said I was being too cautious, too slow, too afraid of growth. I listened quietly. I didn't argue. I had studied the proposal weeks before she even brought it home. I understood the numbers, the liabilities, and the exposure. When she placed the paperwork in front of me to sign, she expected resistance. Instead, I signed without hesitation. My signature didn't mean agreement with the risk. It meant I had structured it carefully to protect myself. The way the contracts were written, the liability was on her and her new venture. Any debt or failure would not touch my remaining assets. Aloan smiled, thinking she had convinced me, thinking I was finally on her side. Corrigan nodded, satisfied that he had guided her successfully. But behind the smile, I had already seen the cracks in their plan. I had anticipated the failure she refused to see. That night, after they left for what they called an early celebration, I reviewed every clause in the contract one more time. Everything was exactly where it needed to be. My name was clean. My company untouched. My future secured. She had taken our visible wealth and risked it on a dream that wasn't mine. I had taken the precaution to make sure the dream, or the failure, would never reach me. I stayed silent, letting her believe she had the upper hand. But I had already won the quiet battle. 6 months after the divorce, the first signs of trouble appeared. Calls from vendors went unanswered. Payments bounced. The new venture that Corrigan had sold as a sure thing began to crumble. Aloan tried to keep it together at first. She reassured friends, smiled at neighbors, and posted calm updates to anyone who asked. But behind closed doors, the panic was real. Creditors started calling daily. Some showed up at her doorstep demanding repayment. The house she had fought so hard for was tied up in loans and lines of credit she couldn't cover. Corrigan disappeared completely. No emails. No calls. Just gone. Every promise he had made evaporated with his sudden absence. Aloan was left alone with a business sinking fast and debts stacking higher than she imagined. I watched the news from a distance. I didn't gloat. I had no interest in rubbing her failures in her face. I simply noted the patterns I had seen coming for months. The aggressive expansion, the blind trust in a partner she barely knew, the loans she personally guaranteed. All of it was predictable. Her pride and impatience had led her here. The house, the cars, the lifestyle she demanded. They were all now under strain. She had thought control meant security. Instead, it had become pressure, and the cracks were visible to anyone paying attention. Meanwhile, my own operations continued quietly. My company, my contracts, my planning, everything remained stable. I had nothing to worry about. The storm she brought upon herself passed around me, never touching what I had carefully built. Aloan realized too late that the world she had chosen was fragile, and the people she had trusted weren't always reliable. The collapse was inevitable, but I had prepared for it from the start. When the first calls from creditors reached Aloan, she didn't think about the settlement we had signed months earlier. She assumed that because it was joint money, she could hold me responsible. What she didn't know was the clause she had overlooked. In the final paperwork, it was written clearly. Any liabilities tied to ventures she started after the divorce were entirely hers. Any debt, any failure, any obligation, none of it could touch me. I had insisted on that clause quietly, without fanfare. I didn't advertise it. I didn't make a scene. It was just protection, written plainly, waiting for the moment it might matter. Aloan discovered this slowly, painfully. When her accountant told her that I wasn't liable for the loans or the debts of her failing business, she froze. The relief I had felt during the signing now became my shield. I wasn't gloating, but I was ready. I had prepared for the worst, and the worst had arrived for her. Corrigan had vanished. The investors had pulled out. Payments were overdue. And yet, no one could come after me. The clause worked exactly as it should. My name was clean. My company was untouched. My savings and investments remained in my control. I stayed quiet while she scrambled. I didn't call her. I didn't intervene. I simply observed the situation unfold, knowing that what I had built quietly for years had protected me completely. Sometimes the smallest, unnoticed details hold the most power. She had fought for what she could see. I had secured what she couldn't see. And in the end, that made all the difference. Months after the collapse of Alohan's venture, my company finally got the big break I had been quietly preparing for. North Vale Strategies won a federal logistics contract. The moment the contract was signed, everything changed. My modest office, once just a desk and a laptop, transformed overnight. We hired a few key employees, expanded our systems, and began handling large shipments and complex schedules. The work was demanding, but it was steady, reliable, and completely mine. Every client, every contract, every detail had been carefully built on the foundation I had laid while everyone else was focused on flashy growth. I didn't celebrate publicly. There were no announcements to neighbors, no social media posts. I didn't need attention or approval. I only felt the quiet satisfaction of knowing that my planning and patience had paid off. With the new stability, I decided it was time to make life easier for the kids. I bought a smaller home near their school. Nothing extravagant, nothing to show off. Just a peaceful place where we could rebuild routine and normalcy together. Every night, when the workday ended, I looked at the kids doing homework or playing in the yard. I saw them safe and happy. I saw what mattered most, and I knew I had protected it. Alohan, meanwhile, was still trying to repair the damage from her failed expansion. Creditors, unpaid bills, and empty promises surrounded her. I had none of that. My life was quiet, focused, and moving forward. In the end, I realized the comeback wasn't about showing her up or winning against her. It was about quietly building a life that could survive anything. And finally, it had. One evening, there was a knock on the door. When I opened it, Alohan stood there. No SV, no confidence traíd. Just her, looking tired and worn down. Her hair was messy, her eyes heavy. She didn't smile. She didn't lecture. She just asked if she could come in. She wasn't there for herself. She explained quickly that she needed help with the kids. The school had sent notices she hadn't been able to handle, and she didn't know what to do. Her voice, usually sharp and demanding, now sounded small, almost scared. I stepped aside and let her in. The kids were surprised to see her, and she knelt down to talk to them gently, apologizing for being absent. I watched quietly, letting her take the lead while still keeping the calm structure I had built in our home. She asked questions about routines, about what they had eaten, what homework was due. She didn't try to control anything. She didn't argue. She listened. After a while, she thanked me and prepared to leave. There was no explanation, no excuses, just a quiet acknowledgement that she had come because she had to. I realized then that the people who appear strongest on the outside are not always the strongest inside. Alohan had lost her empire, and the confidence she once carried had vanished. I didn't gloat. I didn't say anything about the contracts, the debts, or the company I had built. I simply helped her where it mattered, the kids. The only thing I ever wanted to protect was them. And in that moment, it was clear that while she had tried to take everything, she hadn't taken the one thing that counted most. The life and stability I had quietly built for my children. Alohan had taken what she could see. The house, the cars, the appearance of control over the kids' schedule. She believed that by taking these things she had won. But she had missed the parts that really mattered. I kept my name. Everything I had built quietly, every contract, every careful decision, remained under my control. I kept my foresight, the ability to plan ahead, to prepare for what others ignored. I kept my stability, the kind that isn't flashy but lasts. While she chased visible wealth and status, I focused on creating a life that could survive shocks, failures, and bad decisions. When the court revisited custody after her financial collapse, the judge saw the difference. Alohan had struggled. Bills were overdue, accounts mismanaged, and promises broken. I had remained steady. I had shown up for the kids, maintained order, and created a safe and reliable environment. The court didn't need to be told. I had proven it through actions, not words. I didn't seek revenge. I didn't try to humiliate her, or take what little she still had. I just waited. I let the consequences of her choices play out naturally. And through patience and careful planning, I ended up in a position of quiet strength. In the end, what I truly kept wasn't money, cars, or a house. It was the future she had never considered. The life that mattered most to me and the children. She had underestimated what could be achieved without fanfare, without flash, and without trying to control everything. I had kept the things that couldn't be taken away. My integrity, my focus, and the ability to protect what really mattered. That is what survived. And that is what ultimately mattered more than anything she thought she had won.
Some stories don't end, they follow you. If this one stayed in your mind, you know what to do.